Okay, everyone. Welcome to the show tonight. Tonight we have Stanley Cohen on the show. I know everyone's been waiting for this one, so we are gonna go live here. Let me get Stanley brought into OBS and get the mic on and over here, and we are on. All right, everybody. Stanley Cohen, how's
Good
it
evening,
going?
all.
So, one of the things I wanted to do here was just open up with something kind of some levity. But before we get into what is a freedom fighter, let's just open up with something fun, right?
All right.
And I wanna call on one of our old friends. So for this one. So one of the few times me and you have actually gotten to hang out in person and really talk and have fun was like almost a decade ago now at a Barrett Brown / Jeremy Hammond fundraiser in New York.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna say this one out loud. I was smart. I talked early. I was like the second one to talk. I was not gonna follow you. That's not a smart move. And then you get up, of course, and you have this energy when you're up in front of people, right? You know you do. I mean, no need for humility there. You really deliver when you're on the mic. And right after you finish, like you're off stage for all of 5 seconds. They hand the mic to Jay Lederman, and he walks up, and the first thing he says is, "Do I really have to follow that? This isn't fair at all. I'm never following him again." And I remember that moment is just like you, no one should have to follow you when they're talking. It's horrible.
It's listen, it is what it is, and it's funny. I used to do a lot of overseas talking, lots,
Yep.
not much the last 4 years or so, but it's starting. I've had invitations. It's like, yeah, call me in a year when this shit's done.
Right.
But the same thing overseas. I would usually, wrap up a situation, a position, and go on.
Right.
It is what it is. Listen,
It is.
I'm a trial attorney. I've been raving for fucking 37 years.
You've been doing it in front of audiences with juries and people I mean, so
the deal is to convince 12 or 14 or 16 people that
right.
you're right and they're an asshole. The other guys, women. And
Indeed,
so that's
indeed. So, I wanted to talk about all the heavy subjects tonight. How's it going, everybody in chat? We're on Twitch live, so if chat has any questions or anything throughout the night, I'll read them off for us to go over. And they usually do end up with all kinds of cool stuff. What's up, Richard, John, everybody over there? We have a pretty cool chat group here, made up of some people. I think even at least one person joins us every now and then that you have represented in the past. So, way back when. But yeah.
Are they still wanted?
I'm sure for many things, given what's happened in the last few weeks with people like, Barrett Brown possibly facing new charges from the FBI that we don't know what they are, with Commander X being taken on 10-year-old charges back up into the U.S., with what I will refer to as extreme rendition being that he was under refugee status and awaiting an asylum decision when they just grabbed him. That's some bullshit. Seriously. But so, right now, I would think anyone who was around in that time period, especially around like the PayPal 13, 14, depending on how you look at that, is probably sitting there wondering if they're next to get another tap,
Yeah, and it's funny. I've been involved in more than a few rendition cases, and it's been resolved by basically the highest court in the country. If you get renditioned, you've got civil damages, but fuck it, you got no other remedies. You get dragged across the border wherever it's from. You get put in the plane. You get gassed. You get tied. You get noosed, whatever it is. And the next thing you know, you're in front of a jury somewhere, and if you're found guilty, your remedy is to sue for kidnapping. Great.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do? This pro se from MCC, MDC, or from Carol Hart? I don't think so.
And also, bringing up that specific charge and attempting to go for it is as easy as bringing up an entrapment charge. Like, no matter, what is it, 1 in every 3,000 entrapment cases, like, that are actually tried on entrapment, ever make it through? Like, don't try, even if it really is what happened, that's not what you want to take to court. It never wins.
Well, not only does it never win, but to lay people, if you raise the defense of entrapment, it opens the door to everything you've ever done wrong. At that point, you've affirmatively placed in front of a jury the fact that agents, FBI, CIA, LSD, whoever the fuck it is,
Yep.
dragged you in, set you up, and then all of a sudden they can bring in what you did at 12, 14, 18, 20, 20, 27, 29. And at summation time, the prosecutor gets to stand up and say, you think this shit is bad? You think we entrapped them? Let's look at the other 57 events that this person's done over the last 15 years.
They've got a file.
Yeah, and then you say to his jury at the end of it, ignore that. Oh yeah, good. Do we want lunch or do we not want lunch before we bring back a verdict?
Well, that's like what happened with Ross Ulbricht, right? I mean, they brought the whole time before trial, and even in front of the jury multiple times, they brought up the fact that he supposedly and allegedly tried to, murder for hire, right? But they made sure not to actually bring that charge and to drop it before they got to it's time to be in front of a judge with real charges, because they damn well knew they had no evidence of it. But the jury was already tainted by it. I mean, the jury had already heard it.
You are not to think of an elephant in a pink bikini. Do not think of an elephant in a pink bikini. As 7 million people right now are thinking of an elephant in a pink bikini.
Exactly.
I mean, it's all a game. It's this notion that you can want, but that's the beauty of it, because as a defense attorney, you can also do outrageous stuff. The judge sustains the objection, but the jury's heard it.
Exactly.
And even though you can't sum up on it, if you've fleshed it out properly and enough times, it's in the back of their brain. And that's what jury nullification is about. It's about re-educating jurors to understand that the person in the black robes may control the law, but no one can look behind what you decide in terms of the facts. The facts is totally up to you. So if you decide the earth is flat, the earth is flat. So listen to the judge's legal instructions, but remember, nothing that judge or that federal prosecutor says can get in the way of you deciding the facts. Jury nullification.
Yeah, so I was actually with a group in Chicago that, due to a series of dissident and activist cases, stood out front of courts and even around the back doors trying to hand out pamphlets to everyone going in, all about jury nullification.
I remember that.
And you know what? They tried to arrest us all, saying that we were interfering with the process.
I know.
And a couple people did get arrested because then they started to fight with the cops who were trying to, give us shit. But the idea that telling people the law before they enter a court is somehow illegal, it was not mind-blowing, because I fully expect the prosecutors to act this way, but it was complete bullshit.
The last terrorism case I tried in the Southern District of New York, opening day, before we got the jury selection, while we were dealing with motions in limine, the judge gratuitously said, Cohen, by the way, all right, don't pull any jury nullification crap with me. I'm putting you on notice. I understand when it comes to summation, you're going to tell them I'm nobody. But let's not flesh this out, because the minute you do it, I'm calling sidebar and I'm calling the grievance committee. Don't worry about it, Judge. I wouldn't do it. And
of course not.
Of course I did it.
Of
and
course.
He called me to sidebar one more time. I said, yeah, I know, Judge.
But you've already said it, which is exactly the point.
Right. Okay.
Once they've heard it, right?
Yeah.
So, you brought up, kind of one of the things I wanted to really dig into here for the crowd. You brought up, you said the word terrorism and terrorists, and for me, I think of a lot of the clients that you've taken on in the past, depending on, of course, certain people, maybe some bombings and whatnot, like on American soil, but things like Hamas, I don't view them as terrorists personally. As I understand international law, and by all means correct me after I say this, but currently Palestine is an occupied territory by a military force who are killing civilians at will whenever they feel like it. That gives the Palestinians the absolute right under international law to self-defense.
Armed struggle is recognized by the occupied people worldwide. It's interesting that living in the United States, which was built from, forget about terrorism and genocide directed at indigenous communities, folks handing out pamphlets during the American Revolution on the weekends were bombing civilian homes, were going after the British. I mean, look, the reality of it is, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter historically is who wins. Now, under international law, the occupied have an absolute fundamental right to self-determination and self-defense. And that means, look, Civilians are off the plate. You can't specifically target civilians. And yes, the law of war requires you to take, certain precautions to try to minimize that problem. But for example, and I'm not urging anyone, in Israel, 85% of every man, woman, and now these days child is not a civilian. I mean, you've got a country that, 60% are reservists. Another, in terms of occupied Palestine, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that are carrying weapons that have chosen to enter into the fray. You've got security forces, police forces, Shin Bet, the Mossad. Israel is very much Sparta. So the notion that Palestinians have to, focus specifically in terms of self-defense and self-determination at the IOF, at the crossings of Gaza where they're being assassinated,
Right.
violates fundamental notions of international law, and it's dumb. I mean, Israel has chosen to become an armed camp, has chosen to become an occupier, has chosen to unleash incredible crimes against humanity and genocide and ethnic cleansing against a civilian population, which under international law does not have to say, yeah, shoot me again.
Yeah,
I mean, the
right.
world may not like what's happening. The issue that I've said recently to a journalist was, I wasn't stunned by 4,000 rockets. What stunned me was there were so few casualties, which in and of itself sends a particular message.
Yes.
So, this notion that people engaged in armed struggle to try to defend themselves, their communities, their families, their legitimate rights of self-determination under international law is settled a long time ago. And when you take a look at national liberation movements, whether it's Hamas, whether it's the IRA, whether it was the people in Algeria, whether it's indigenous folks throughout the world, whether it was people fighting in Cuba, wherever people fight for freedom and liberty, that's the way it goes. It unfolds. And colonial powers and colonial projects and people that are occupying territories start screaming foul, foul, foul. Okay, let's get Sanders to send $1 trillion worth of F-35s to Gaza. Let's get 500 tanks. Let's get 16 destroyers. Let's level the playing field and talk about it. The reality of it is, I know of no one basically occupying, and I'm not talking about occupied Palestine as in 1948.
Right.
I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of people that are illegally occupying or trying to annex Palestinian lands are legitimate targets. That's the reality.
Yeah, they're not just coming in and annexing lands. I mean, they are literally going in and tearing up farmland and salting land and tearing down homes and building up their own. Beyond also like what they're doing in Sheikh Jarrah right now, where they're literally just stealing people's homes. But it's not just like they're coming in. Like, there are entire plots of land that were literally farms that were feeding half of Palestine that have been destroyed by Israel to just put them through that much more pain.
Sure.
And here's one thing that I really want to make clear, because I wanna get this out there because it needs to be said, and that is, no amount of anti-Semitism is good for the Palestinian cause. If you stand for a free Palestine, do not be out there spouting anti-Semitic stuff, because that doesn't help them. That gives the enemies who try and say everyone who's pro-Palestine must be anti-Semitic all the ammo they need to come at us when we talk about Israel's occupation being an absolutely illegal occupation. So I want it made clear, like, I am not anti-Semitic, I am anti-Zionist occupation.
Well, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
In 1995, I was doing a hearing on the attempt by Israel to extradite Abu Marzouk. And what was brought in front of the judge at that time, who interestingly enough was a supporter of the IRA, but when it came to Palestine, this is 95, 96.
Yep.
I had now passed a renowned imam that was testifying, because the government was trying to point out that the charter of Hamas was anti-Semitic, it was hateful, it was violent, it was illegal, it was blah, 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 blah. So I have an imam on the stand, and we're going through the original charter. And at one point, I looked at him and I said, "Do you hate yourself?" And he laughed. He said, "No." And the judge said, "Well, what do you mean, Cohen?" I said, "Well, Judge, this is a Semite." So, I mean, if you're talking about being critical, and it was the same hearing where jihad became an issue,
Yes.
where the government was alleging that jihad meant certain things. And I asked the imam, I said, are you doing jihad right now? We said, absolutely, doing good things for your people.
Yeah.
So when it comes to resistance, when it comes to national liberation, when it comes to this battle to control the hearts and minds of the rhetoric, there are words that are misconstrued, misapplied, and not by accident, which are designed to feed into, in the case of Palestine, the Zionist agenda.
Yep.
So you got to be really careful. And that's why, today I had this debate on Twitter with some folks that were a bit surprised that we're getting into the whole issue, the talisman that's been brought up that, the German Jews tried to make a deal with the Nazis to take over Palestine in 33, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay. So I pushed it playing the lawyer, doing the cross-examination, and ended up basically, the folks conceded that the fact that a handful of Zionists that were trying to co-opt, to underwrite, to manipulate a, quote, position of Jews in Germany for their own personal gain didn't mean that was a position that was taken by the mass of German Jews. You got to be careful not to conflate Zionism with Judaism. And when it comes to anti-Semitism, I know of no group more anti-Semitic than Zionists. I know of no group who hates the Arab population, the Middle East, North Africa population more than the Zionists. But you've got Ashkenazi Jews that are the great grandchildren of people that converted to Judaism 400 years ago, that are all of a sudden screaming, I'm Sephardic, I'm Semitic. Well, if the deal is that, then everyone's Semitic, because if you believe the Old Testament, we all come from Adam and Eve in that particular region. So this notion, the answer to that, which I use all the time, is, so in other words, if the Mohawks in Akwesasne, the police force picks up their AR-15s and they drive down the road to land claim areas and at gunpoint force people out of their farms, burn their crops, destroy their homes, take their property, that's legitimate, right? Because look, you've got legitimate land claims that are only 200 years old as opposed to 3,000 years. You've got people operating under color of law. So if we're talking about land claims going back thousands of years, how much stronger are indigenous people of North America and of Latin America when it comes to European colonial projects that have occupied them for about 200 or 300 years now? So you can't have one. How many Jews in Brooklyn are willing to give up their homes, to lose their businesses, to be removed from their community because it's got a land claim base to it? Or how many Zionists, better yet? You just don't see it.
None.
This double standard, which says we are allowed because someone in a book said the earth was created in 6 days and God rested on the 7th. And I still haven't figured out if it was a 24-hour day or not. Or someone said that Jonah lived inside a whale for 3.5 years, has suddenly said, 3,742 years ago, that house over there was mine. I'm taking it. Well, my indigenous clients have a claim for all of North America.
They do.
Next,
if you want to go specifically there, look at the Six Nations right now in Ontario with the 1492 land back lane. Their occupation of territory to try and take back some of the land that has been wrongfully taken from them. And what's interesting about the land that the Six Nations are currently occupying is, if you look at their original land claim, which was given to them due to the War of 1812, when they fought alongside the Canadians and the British against the U.S., they were given land because they were driven out of New York and that whole area, the Mohawks, the Seneca, a lot of the Iroquois Nation, right? The Iroquois Confederacy. They were all brought up there, and they were given this big plot of land, which just so happens to be the most expensive land in all of Canada right now in southeastern kind of Ontario, right? And so suddenly their land goes from this big on the map to this big on the map, and they own almost nothing. And in talking to them, specifically Skylar Williams, he was on the show a couple weeks ago. He's amazing people, but if you want to go there, they all have a claim to almost all of northern New York. Everything, all the way back probably from Brooklyn to the capital,
Well, people forget, during the Meech Lake Accord, which was the last time Quebec tried to secede and become an independent nation.
Right.
I was involved in representing Mohawks in the Haudenosaunee at that time. And we sent a document and said, look, no problem. You take all 2.5% of Montreal, that's yours. You can have it. The
Right.
rest is ours. You can have your independent nation. We're just going to move everything up there. We've got the land claims. It's ours. Next.
Yep.
It's sort of like I'll never forget at Oka when I was involved in the standoff there, and there at the treatment center for 3 or 4 months. What pissed off, I forget his name, the Prime Minister of Quebec more than anything else was the introduction to a document that I drafted and was then changed a little bit, was greetings from our nation to your province. He lost his fucking mind. Totally went batshit. I heard about that later on.
I love
But
it.
it's this twist of history that is so politically convenient, that is so misleading in so many facts, that you can get a little point out here, a little point out there, and the next thing you know, it's about Jewish space lasers, the lizard people, and whatever else is floating around these days.
Well, at that point, you can also, if you want to go back that far in history, right, then you can talk about, the supposed, enslavement of Jewish peoples, by the Babylonians, right? Supposedly, with all the historical documents, a hell of a lot of them ended up enslaved by the Babylonians, and those are all the ones that kind of ended up in Europe and everything else. Well, the people that were left behind, those are the Palestinians today. Like, if you want to go really deeply into the history of these things, and that to me would say, kind of the same people if you're going back that far and you really want to start to rely on history. But like still, I mean, at this point, like we are at a point where it's an occupation, it's an annexation, it should all be dealt with, but instead we're feeding Israel nothing but weapons and money.
Yeah.
It is in supposedly the American interest that Israel is this powerful, and we don't care about the Palestinians at all as a government.
Well, look, Israel since look, doing some research on something years ago, I came across this great quote to Harry Truman when it was on his desk, when there were advisors that said, don't support it, don't support it, don't support it. And Truman turned around and said, Jews vote, Palestinians don't. Next.
Wow.
And that was 1947, just before the first massive criminal seizure. So at that point, Truman could have said, we're not doing this. In fact, Truman had previously said no. FDR, although there's some debate, had said no. But it came to a point where Truman said, look, Jews vote and Palestinians don't. Next, let's move on.
And that's kind of where we are today with J Street, right? With all of the lobbying.
Oh my God, J Street. Please.
Well, I mean,
I listen. I hear you. Everyone has a right to live with dignity and respect. But when it comes to liberation, equality, and freedom, that's a different story.
Seems to be.
It's okay. I want to take nice photo ops with you.
Yep.
If you're wearing moccasins, can I sit next to you and go home and say, gee, I was at a powwow? And I don't mean to be dismissive, because powwows have a traditional role to play. But we are so stereotypical when it comes to exalting so-called democratic ideal in the West and in Europe, and then imposing its control upon people from different cultures, different societies, different histories. In the case of Israel, people keep saying to me, it's interesting. People keep saying Israel controls the United States. Not at all. Israel has been a dutiful proxy since day one. Yep. Israel has been the white boy and white girl from Brooklyn and Poland, sitting there doing exactly what the United States wants it to do. Only once or twice has there been some schism, and on both occasions, most recently was with Baker. When the first so-called Gulf War took place, Baker got dispatched to talk to whoever it was, I don't remember who the prime minister was at that point, and said, look, we're going to war. It's possible Iraq is going to shoot some missiles into your country. We don't want you to respond. We're trying to build a coalition here. Please don't respond. And the Israeli prime minister said, look, we have no choice. What do you expect us to do? Nothing? Baker shook his hand, said thank you, got up, started to walk out the door, took a blank check out of his pocket, ripped it up, threw it on the floor, and said, when you want me to glue this check back together again, give me a call. Israel didn't respond to the rockets. So, proxy situation.
It is.
They serve a particular role in terms of the Western colonial. The Abraham Accords is the perfect. The so-called Abraham Accords is the perfect example right now. It was in the financial interests of Kushner and Trump and the whole family for these accords to kick in. Israel embraced it. It cut some deals. The ink hasn't even dried, and they're slaughtering in Gaza again. And meanwhile,
but Kushner is amazing at peace. At peace. Bigly.
Listen, the all-time great plan. All it is housing court. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Housing court.
Of course. Of course, and then another 100,000 dead Palestinians also. Just
Yeah, but
but
meanwhile,
ignore that.
wow, listen, the Kushner just made what, $1 billion in 4 years off the Middle East. I'd love to know what count. The Air Force One was filled with how many suitcases that were undisclosed,
Yeah,
just filled with tens and hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars. That's what it was about. They
yeah,
exploited it, they worked it,
yeah,
and here we are back at square one again. And the difference is, I've got to give them credit though. They were able to bring together a broad-based coalition of Palestinian resistance, self-determination, and self-defense that we haven't seen in decades. So you've got the so-called Palestinians of 48, you've got people in Gaza, you've got people in Quds, which is part of the West Bank, you've got the West Bank, all fighting, all marching, all resisting, using a variety of means. It's
yep,
the first time that's happened in a while. One of Israel's strengths has been the ability to separate. So at various
yeah.
times, there's been armed struggle in the West Bank, at various times in Gaza, at various times in Quds. But now, and along with the diaspora community worldwide and supporters, you've got this coalition. As I said to a friend of mine, actually, I was speaking to the son of one of the original leaders of Hamas today, and we were talking about it. And he said, I'm smiling. He said, with all the pain, all the suffering, and his family's originally from Gaza, and most of them are still there. He said, I am feeling optimistic in a way that I have not felt optimistic in the last 20 years. We have a coalition that's developing. We have support that's growing. We have the world becoming more and more uncomfortable with Israel. We've got more and more sanctions in place, trade unions that are refusing to support Israel. I'm optimistic.
That is that's a strangely positive place to be when it takes this to get there.
Yeah, no, I've said this for a long time, and people will speak to me and be depressed. And I said, look, it's terrible. I've got family, I've got friends, I've got comrades that have lost their lives, that are in prison, that are, expats, quote unquote, that are living in the diaspora community, people that I love, people I spend time with, that are going through a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And I'm a long hauler in terms of, I've been involved in the struggle in my own way for 25, going on 30 years.
Yeah.
I have been feeling a sense of optimism over the last 18 to 24 months that I hadn't before. I think the world at last is getting tired of the bullshit. They're getting tired of the slaughter. They're getting tired of the cripple. They're getting tired of being exposed for supporting a death camp, a military industrial complex, and the days they are changing.
I really do believe you. It's one of those things that it's nice to see. We have a really strong that community is really strong here in Boston. So when it comes time to do, events downtown in support of Free Palestine, like we have pretty large events here in Boston, and that's been really good to see because you could notice, 10 years ago when these events were happening, there were 20 or 30 people there, and now you're seeing very disparate groups because, like you said, the Palestinian struggle isn't one unified group. It has been many groups who kind of infought, much like almost everyone on the left does and everyone on the right does. You all factionalize even though you're on similarly the same side, right? But these days we're seeing when these events happen, people who you wouldn't have expected to be standing hand in hand, right next to each other, yelling the same thing, holding the same sign. And I think that is really a good sign at this point.
Yeah, I don't want to romanticize the pain and the suffering and the struggle. And ultimately, the decisions on the nature and extent of the resistance on the ground is up to Palestinians.
Yeah, straight.
But in terms of the world community, I am seeing solidarity in Ireland and France, elsewhere in Italy, in Latin America, in ways and through various means that I've not seen before. That's
Well,
good.
yeah, Ireland was the first European country to legally and officially and publicly identify what Israel is doing as occupation.
Yeah.
They came out and just said it outright, and it wasn't even like when you look at the vote that they took, it wasn't even close. I mean, it won hands down. That's another one of those. Just it looks like the tides are changing just a little. But it's better than they weren't changing at all and they were going in the wrong direction for the last 30 years, 50 years.
Oh, let's not forget that the caterpillar that murdered Rachel Corrie came from Ireland, from a company that was Irish.
Yeah.
I mean, those days are gone. And
Yeah.
When the accountability was demanded, people sort of slid. It was an arm of Sinn Féin. Oh,
Yep.
no. It doesn't happen anymore. So increasingly, people are becoming sensitized to what they eat, what they drink, where they travel, what they do, and what they're not going to do. And that's what ultimately outsiders, non-Palestinians, whether it's in Palestine or the diaspora community, can do.
Yeah.
But what is still an issue for me, and I still publicly get involved with this, is liberal Zionists and even liberal anti-Zionists who try to dictate the nature and extent of the struggle on the ground. So I'll hear someone lecturing about the need for, sit-ins. I hear someone talking about passive civil disobedience. I'll hear someone talking about letter writing campaigns, and which my response is great. You need to go to the local UJA and sit in and scream, but don't try to dictate the nature and extent of how Palestinians are going to resist on the ground.
Yeah, exactly. If you aren't there, if you aren't the one getting bombed currently, you do not have a say on how that person responds.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty simple. Well, I mean, that all kind of speaks back to, like, if you look in India with Gandhi, right? You look at the pacifist nature that everyone wants to attribute there, but everyone kind of forgets about the Salt March. That there's a little more than just the pacifism that actually happened there.
Well, the other thing they forget about, and I first discovered it, God, it has to be 35 years ago in a book, and I looked for it and I still can't find it, was, in the days when Gandhi was doing sit-ins, at night he was meeting with people involved in armed struggle and identifying targets to go to and not to go to. It's
exactly.
sort of the marriage between Malcolm and Martin Luther King, between those that want to sing "We Shall Overcome" and those that say, we're going to fuck you up if we don't overcome. I mean, there's this balance that is required historically, and it depends upon where you are in the nature of the resistance. Let's not forget in Algeria, when they locked up all the men and figured, all right, this is over, the women took over.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Flexibility, the struggle goes on.
Absolutely. Earlier when we were talking about the stuff, you brought up the notion that you have been involved for a very long time, and for the audience, I mean, I'm sure some of them already know, but some of them don't. You have represented a lot of what I'll say interesting characters over the years. All the way back to, like, my earliest introduction to you representing anyone was way back in '93, right? With the first World Trade Center bombing, but all the way up until even recently, and beyond just the fact that you've represented these people, like, some of the higher ups in Hamas, and when the government was trying to basically charge bin Laden's son-in-law, to try and basically get him to do something against his father-in-law, which he wasn't involved at all. This was just all pressure tactics, and you represented because people in that situation deserve representation. But what that led to for you was decades of attack from the U.S. government in any way they could come at you. And it worked the same way it worked for a lot of people, right? It worked financially, didn't it?
Look, my first, quote, controversial defense was as a legal aid attorney when I, had brown hair and a brown beard, and
I remember those days.
And didn't have an extra 13 pounds from COVID when I represented Larry Davis along with Bill Kunstler and Lynn Stewart, and we successfully defeated the Bronx District Attorney. He was found not guilty after he had shot 9 cops. So from there, it's been a series over the course of my career of representing, for lack of a better word, dissidents, movements involved in armed struggle, individuals, political activists, unpopular persons. I've represented IRA members, represented members of the BLA, represented members of AIM, was the attorney in Oka, represented successfully Abu Marzouk, have represented various people of Hezbollah. I've spent a considerable amount of time representing lots of folks, but I've also represented the woman who ran up and down the street in topless in Newburgh and was arrested, for being topless. And it was an art statement. It was an art form. It was a defense, and the case was dismissed. So, there have been a lot of high profile cases, but there have also been a lot of mom and pop cases that just get dealt with, get done, and you move on. PayPal 14, Payback
exactly.
13.
A lot of our audience will remember you from watching the We Are Legion documentary, which we're both in, and Brian did an amazing job on.
Yeah.
Where you were talking about Mercedes and all the stuff that they all went through. So, and again, for anyone who hasn't watched that documentary, you should. Bride did some amazing work on that. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, even down to like the music and the transitions. Like,
Yeah,
that's just
yeah.
visually one of my favorite documentaries to watch. Yeah, We Are Legion for anyone in the audience. Well, you say that, like, you have represented a lot of big people. You've represented a lot of just kind of more almost normal cases compared to your big ones, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I did probably, I don't know, 1,000 pro bono cases during the 10 years we fought in Tompkins Square Park. The squatter cases, the tent city cases, the homeless shelter cases. I mean, I lived in the Lower East Side for 30 years, and I'm going to head back there pretty soon. And I was part of a community that, in fact, Rent was based, the movie, the play were
Yep.
both based on our activity setting up, Tompkins Square Park. So there were lots of those cases that, they didn't attract anything, but the reality of it is cops raiding a park, beating up demonstrators, charging them for offenses. They need lawyers. That's the kind of law I do. So, we did the East 13th squatter case. It took 6 months, which set precedent, where we were able to get a Supreme Court judge to decide that 3 buildings had been abandoned sufficiently so that under our own civilian eminent domain, our squatter notions, we own the buildings. Now, we were reversed on appeal,
Of
but it
course.
still was a precedent-setting case. So, sure, there are big cases and there are little cases and in-between cases. Um, you know, I've told people for years that all defense work is political in this country.
Yes.
Almost everyone charged with an offense in this country over the years is based upon color, is based upon poverty, is based upon politics. Those are political cases.
Yeah.
They don't attract attention. They don't hit the TV. They don't hit the newspaper often, but they're political. I spent
What
almost 7 years.
charges you get are based on what class you're in currently, because some counties don't want to fight with the rich people in that county, and surprisingly, their kids don't get as many charges as the poor people.
Listen,
It's
I
all
spent
political.
the first 7 years, almost 7 years of my life with the Legal Aid Society, the Criminal Defense Division in the Bronx. I did thousands of cases,
Yep.
thousands of cases. Every one of them was political. Every single one that was dragged in front of me was there because they were black, or they were Latinx, or they were a woman, or they were a sex worker, or they were poor, or they were standing on a street corner screaming at cops. They're all political. Yes, there were cases where, a fight in the household resulted in people getting arrested. Yes, there were shoplifting cases. And yes, there were robbery cases. But the criminal justice system is essentially at its core political. But, I've now spent 25 years doing a lot of work on international political stuff in the classic sense, representing movements and individuals and persons. And it goes on. I'm dealing with those issues right now. I'm representing Tilly, who the U.S. wants
Yes.
in Switzerland right now for a hack.
Yep.
Earlier this year, I was able, it pissed off some people because I had to beat up Russia. I represented successfully a Chechnyan who there was a red notice for him from Interpol because he was alleged to have tossed a grenade some 13 or 14 years ago at the FSB. And we were able to prevail. We got the red notice lifted. We got him protection under the Convention Against Torture. And what
Nice.
it meant in terms of Interpol was it was a finding that Russia politically persecutes political opponents and tortures them. Now,
Yes.
that immediately means thousands of warrants for political dissidents that are wanted by Russia outside of Russia have a claim now, a colorable argument to move in Interpol. So that's a case.
Yeah.
I'm representing Emma Best right now, who was
Yep.
the subject of
And I love Emma.
a brilliant journalist who was
And
the
Grace
subject
and all of them.
an MLAT request in Germany about a year ago, who was one of the prime persons with her organization that released Blue Leaks.
Yep.
So they're political cases. These are cases that go to the essence of freedom, that go to the essence of accountability, that go to the essence of principle, that go to the essence of I'm going to do something in this world. I'm going to be something not because I need to be powerful or affluent or rich, but because I've got a short journey and I want to fight the good fight. So people
Damn
like
straight.
Emma and Tilly and a young kid in Palestine or elsewhere, these are folks that have decided they're not going to simply watch history pass them by. And the same way, you need lawyers and advocates and organizers who are going to represent them, who are going to defend them, who are going to speak out on their behalf, because silence is complicity.
Damn straight. You know, one thing that I do want to say to you is Tilly is actually going to be my guest on the show on Monday. So a few days from now, Tilly's coming on. And I will do my best not to ask any questions that offer up any implications that we don't want
Oh
said
my
publicly. I will do a good job for you. But yes,
Every time I go on Twitter and I start reading Tilly's posts, I go, "Oh fuck."
yeah. So
But
for the audience, if anyone didn't see it, Tilly is coming on Monday, and that'll be a lot of fun. Something that you might not have seen on my Twitter yesterday, but in the morning I got a message on LinkedIn, which was a prospecting message. Because I run my own, company basically, the show, but I'm a web designer, right? So I'm listed as like, I own my own company, but I mean, it's a podcast basically. That's not owning your own company, but the way LinkedIn works, it says that. So I get prospecting messages every now and then, and one came in from Verdaka, and they were asking about my current security setup and did I need cameras and would I like a Yeti travel mug just for having a conversation.
right.
So I posted that and tagged Tilly and a few others saying, so do I really want the mug? To which I was asked to please respond. So I did. And they called me in like 5 minutes. Like I hit the button to respond to their stupid little automated thing that said, yes, contact me. And they called me like 5 minutes later. The guy picks up and says, oh, I was just, I called back so quick because you were so fast to respond to our message that I wanted to know what your needs were. And I said, oh, well, Tilly did nothing wrong. And I'm a big fan of the work that was done, and you work for the devil. And the sales guy on the other end said, and these were his words, he said, we fixed the hack, there are no more problems, we're good here. And I said, yeah, no. And then he hung up on me. But
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious when his response to me saying, you work for the devil was, but we fixed the hack.
We fixed it. It's working fine now.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
the surveillance system is now back surveilling like it was supposed to.
Yeah, it's what. Hey, listen, these are great women. These are great fighters. These are great resistors, and there's a price to pay. And at
There
this
really
point,
is.
Tilly's under indictment. She can't go anywhere. Fortunately, Switzerland is in the 21st century when it comes to these types of offenses.
Yep.
We'll fight it. My suspicion is the United States will never see Tilly in the United States.
Extradition is going to be really hard from that country.
Yeah, I mean it's tough. She has a lawyer in Switzerland who's really top notch. He was
Nice.
one of Snowden's attorneys.
Nice.
We talk frequently. I enjoyed putting together a legal memorandum which was sent to the Swedish to the Swiss prosecutor in chief, which was a 10-page legal memorandum which pointed out why no matter what they do, she doesn't answer questions, she can't answer questions, you can't coerce her. If you're going to talk to her, I have to be present. Oh, and by the way, fuck you. It wasn't really literally, but he was very respectful and said, thank you. If I can do anything to help you in the future, give me a shout.
Right.
Meanwhile, you've got the other case where for a year we've been trying to deal with Germany in terms of the MLAT request for Emma, and we can't get anywhere. Everything's buried and covered and buried and covered. And was the server seized? Was it access? What's going on? And it's lunacy. It's just total lunacy. And you're talking about an attack on a journalist. You're talking about an attack on pure journalism. You're talking about a platform which by design goes out of its way to make sure that information that is personal, private, and sensitive is redacted. And once that takes place, it's no different than the New York Times. You have an obligation to get news out into the community, to educate people. The marketplace of ideas demands not what the government says, but what comes to journalists that are alternative sources, such as Emma.
And then we run into the government's wonderful thoughts more recently on what is a journalist and which journalists are at the level that deserve protections. Because you've seen some of these cases that have been coming up over the last year where people have been like out in California requesting police records in counties where you have to be a journalist to get those records. And then it made it to, court, and the court said, yeah, you're not a journalist because, well, you have a YouTube, but it's not a separate entity. It's under your own name, so you're not a journalist. And you're like, well, that's some bullshit, because that's not how it works anymore.
Well, the interesting thing is that in the original Bill of Rights, the only class that was designated specifically was the press. That was it. That was it, just the press.
Yep.
And that was Tom Paine handing leaflets out on the street corner under an alias and saying "fuck you."
Right.
So today, 200 years later, journalism is journalism. People that get on air, people that do public, people that do blog, it's journalism.
Yep.
I mean, if someone is going to tell me they have a right to carry an AR-15 and a super magazine that's got 1,000 rounds or whatever the hell it is,
Right.
because the Second Amendment said that's cool 240 years ago, then I'm going to say, well, the First Amendment said the press.
Yeah, and
And
they
also,
put that one first for a reason, because it's that
exactly
important.
right. It's exactly right. You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting. The Supreme Court decision today, I expected it. And, you know, I have this argument with folks all the time that are worried about anti-BDS legislation.
Right.
It's not going to be upheld. It's not going to be, you can pass it all day long. It's never going to pass constitutional muster. And the reason it's not going to pass constitutional muster is not because they're enlightened, they're good, they care about Palestinians, but because a strong First Amendment is necessary for religious freedom. It is necessary, for example, today, the case where the schoolgirl was suspended from her team for a year because she said, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you on her blog.
Yep, the
And
Pennsylvania cheerleader case.
8-1 today said, no, this is protected. They didn't say all speech by her would have been protected, because then you've got the issue of fighting words. You've got the issue of when it crosses the line, which is well defined under Brandenburg, et cetera.
Yep.
But the reality of it is, when you see an 8-1 decision, it's not because they like the kid.
No.
It's not because they like BDS. It's
No.
because the First Amendment is basically the linchpin of the right today in America. The pushback by bakeries, the pushback by communities. Don't forget, just last week in Philadelphia, the adoption center was upheld.
Yep.
They're refusing to accept, to deal with, or to facilitate adoptions to the LGBTQ community. That's on the basis of religious First Amendment practice. So the notion that the First Amendment is under siege, it may be under siege, but at the end of the day, it's every bit as powerful for the right as it is for the left and folks in between.
It is. But, you know, I do have a lot of, let's call it opinions on the religious cases related to the bakery, or that, as a, what I will refer to myself as a devout atheist. You know, I know what kind of an atheist I am. I'm kind of a jerk about it. But, like, you know, like, I know I'm that guy.
But you see, I've never understood, and I had a discussion with one of the lawyers, rather than to pursue the whole First Amendment claim, there's a Commerce Clause claim there. What broke the back of Jim Crow was the Commerce Clause. What broke the back of Jim Crow was, no, we're not going to allow you to segregate hotels. We're not going to allow you to segregate restaurants. We're not going to allow you to segregate buses and stops, because you are impacting the Interstate Commerce Clause. And that's every bit in the, as compelling as the First Amendment claims. It wasn't raised. It's something that's traditionally got to be fleshed out.
Yeah, and that's kind of awkward that it wasn't raised too. Like there's something there that's weird to me.
Well, look, who knows what the findings were in the courts below. The Supreme Court grants cert petitions, you know, on issues that they want to deal with. They don't on others. You know, I had a discussion with a client's family yesterday that was worried about, if we prevent, whether we won or lost in the Second Circuit, what's going to happen with the Supreme Court? I said, nothing. The Supreme Court grants cert petitions on 350 cases a year out of, I don't know, 10,000 requests. I mean, they cherry pick based upon the politics of the moment, whether it's a so-called left court or right court, middle of the road. They pick and choose cases, and some folks go, why are they picking this case? Why? Because they're going to use this to stand in support of an issue that they've traded off with other judges a year from now.
Damn straight. Or you're Clarence Thomas and your rich backers have decided that, you know, they want you to take this one.
The biggest loss for Clarence Thomas to Scalia was, once Scalia passed, Thomas was forced to actually speak from the bench.
Right.
He hadn't uttered a word in 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, he was unbelievably silent.
Yeah, had nothing to say. And now that he does have something to say, it's still nothing to say.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. I mean, it's annoying. You know, I'll get, I haven't liked the thing he said since, but, you know, I wanted to, you see, and I'm bringing this up because you've talked about it publicly before, and someone asked me in one of my chats, you know, we were talking about the fact that you have represented some interesting characters and organizations over the years, and In one of the interviews I've heard you talk about before, the way the government tried to get you to stop doing that was through coming at your finances and saying, well,
Yeah.
obviously you were taking money from groups that we have on terrorism watch lists, which is illegal. And I don't think you did, right?
No. Here's what let me tell you the experience. When
Yeah,
I
yeah.
represented Abu Marzouk, we did a fundraiser. And the government, this was just after Hamas had become designated.
Yep.
And the government was concerned that people that were now on designated lists or soon to be would be making contributions. So we negotiated a deal that was supposed to be this segregation wall where we would provide amounts and names of individuals and it would not be shared with the criminal division. Lo and behold, in 96, 97, 98, increasingly in Palestinian prosecutions, I began to see names of people connected to Abu Marzouk, donations they had made, contributions they had made, money they had raised, connected to that war, which was not supposed to be released. So
Yep.
I made a decision at that point that in terms of foreign designated organizations, I was going to do pro bono work. You're
Yeah,
supposed
straight.
to get an OFAC license, an Office of Financial Asset Control. The only time I've gotten that license is when you had to get it to go to a country, to go to Iran, for example, because the state is banned. But in terms of individual cases, I took the position with the government, if I'm not getting paid by an FTO, I don't have to get an Office of Financial Asset Control license. I don't have to report anything. And their position is, well, what about expenses? And my position was, if I do due diligence off of a computer list and someone wants to pick up an airplane ticket, or someone wants to pick up a meal, or someone wants to pick up a hotel stay for a week in country X, and they're not on the list, that's none of your fucking business. So
Damn
I had
straight.
an argument. I had an argument with a lawyer for OFAC who said, you need to get a license, and if you're not going to get a license, we're going to indict you. I said, good, fucking indict me. What are you
Yeah.
going to charge me with? Pro bono work for an FTO? I said, there's a little something bizarre about a country that exalts the democratic ideal and the notion that everyone is entitled to justice, but yet I have to get a license, provide information about sources, where I'm going, when I'm going, and why I'm going. Fuck you. So that set in motion about a 10-year harassment, material support. In the shadow of literally the day after 9/11, someone visited my partner in Akwesasne. They had been someone had asked from the feds to go to the tribal police, to go to my partner to answer questions about activity of mine, besides almost throwing him down a flight of stairs. I mean, she told him to fuck off.
Right.
But this is already, 5, 6, 8 years into this hunt. And it was really triggered initially. And the bottom line was, if the government had not played dirty, if the government had not entered into a deal with us, which said we're not going to provide the information to anyone else, it would not have happened. But having done that, I was not going to be a source of discovery for future clients or future political activists by providing information to an OFAC license. So I still am in that position. If an FTO or an individual approaches me, I do the case pro bono. There have been exceptions where it's not been pro bono for someone who's not been on a list, although they're political.
Right.
And people take care of it that are not on lists. I do my due diligence and I move on.
Right. So I mean, it was basically just political targeting of you. There was no real stance. They were just coming at you because they didn't like the kind of clients you were honestly representing successfully.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, this was to deter. Look, my de facto partner and best pal for years, Lynn Stewart, 10 years in federal prison, rest in peace. She was released on compassionate release after, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. What triggered it? She was being a lawyer. She was being an advocate. She was speaking on behalf of the share. She was
Yep.
taking public positions and making statements. They investigated Bill Kunstler for years.
Yeah.
There are attorneys throughout the country that the more political you are, the more vulnerable you become, the more they target you. Anthony Serra twice went to prison, twice refused to pay taxes because it was subsidizing the military-industrial complex in this country. Twice went to short-term prisons, twice had his license removed, twice got it back, and the feds are still fucking with him. You're supposed to, in their view, when you take the oath, and by the way, I had my fingers crossed at the bar, when you take the oath, the flag comes first. And, my position my entire life has been, flags and borders and boundaries are meaningless except if you don't have them. If you're a
Right.
stateless person, then the notion of a flag, a state, an anthem, an oath, it means something. But for the rest of us that are not stateless, to
Right.
lock us into this pigeonhole that we have to walk a certain way, talk a certain way, respond a certain way, carry out an oath the way they interpret it, is a compromise with principle and it's a compromise with purpose.
It goes straight to the Arab Spring, right? During the Arab Spring, I ended up doing some interviews while we were working heavily with the people of Tunisia, and a lot of hackers were working on taking down all of Ben Ali's infrastructure. And on the day that they actually took out Ben Ali's communications with the military in a way where he could no longer talk but in person with military staff, I ended up doing an interview, and I was in on watching all of this stuff go down. So during the interview, I was asked, "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping?" And the honest answer is, who cares if they're Tunisian or what do these borders mean? I don't. These borders are like constructs of weirdos like you who seem to think they're important. That's a human being who's being oppressed. I care. So like and they just blew their mind. They didn't understand that like borders really are more bothersome to me than anything else. Like they're kind of in the way of being a human.
It's funny. You reminded me, this comment just reminded me of during 2014, when Israel gave Gaza notice, and in fact it was basically Palestine, that at midnight they planned on shutting down all internet service, all access, and that was the end of it. And I had been having a discussion with someone, rest in peace, who was alleged to have been a leader of Anonymous, who was one of the PayPal 14, and I had mentioned this to him,
Yep.
just in passing, in discussion, for no purpose, and he laughed. And okay, he laughed. And as it turns out, Israel shut everything down at 12 o'clock midnight, and at 2 minutes after midnight, everything went back up.
Damn straight it did.
And Israel then tried to shut it down again and couldn't. And then Israel started to lose everything. So my friend called me and said, I was asleep. Did anything weird happen? I said,
what are you talking about?
I'm clueless. I have no idea. So the internationalists are ultimately why I am so optimistic at this point. This generation of women and men worldwide who understand that these narrow parameters, these confines that are constructed and imposed upon us from birth are meaningless. They're irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's your world. You can't talk about environmental disaster. You can't talk about survival if you stop at the border of Canada and New York.
Yeah.
For years, the biggest problem for cancer from hypocystine was not just from the Alcoa plant, one of the Superfund cleanup sites, but from the plants coming across the river in Cornwall. So the notion that somehow you can just carve up and define national boundaries and flags and ants and oaths and oaths in a world that has grown bigger but smaller, in a world where a kid who's 9 years old in Ecuadorial Africa is speaking to someone in Colombia as if they were sitting next to each other by computer. The old rules are gone. They're done. They're finished. And here we have the struggle by the European colonial projects that still continue, that still think they can sing the same song, pull the same shit, and survive. And those days are gone. They're done. They're finished.
Absolutely. 100%. Now, audience, I for all of you that have been here since the beginning, you will now see what I was talking about when I was talking about Jay having to follow Stanley. Like, just this is how Stanley always is. The energy with the delivery is just it's always fun to talk to you, man. I always enjoy these conversations. But yeah, the other interesting thing, like we talked a little about this, but you kind of just said it outright that the difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist usually comes down to who wins, right? And that falls in line with the whole the winners write the history books, right? But at some point you do have to make some distinctions, and for me, I think they're pretty clean and clear. It's not all about the victor; it's about the fight itself, and is it a just fight? And like when you look at the Palestinians, that is a very just fight against an unjust enemy who is specifically violating as many international laws as could exist on this front, right? With the full backing of some of the most powerful states and militaries in the world.
Look, Dropping 2 atom bombs on civilians is terrorism. Wall Street is terrorism. The White House is terrorism. Starving to death 500,000 children in Iraq is terrorism. The list is endless. Terrorism is not women and men, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Africa, that are fighting for self-determination, that are fighting to rid themselves of the yoke of neo-colonial projects. That's liberation. There are times, sure, when civilians get caught up in crossfire, and in particular incidents, it happens. I've taken a position for 25 years. I do not support targeting civilians, but I am certainly not going to get involved in this discussion over firecrackers landing in the sand as being targeting civilians from Gaza, when you've got thousands of Gazans and you've got tens of thousands of Palestinians that are targeted every day for nothing more than the fact that they are breathing, they are walking, they are thinking, and they are talking. So this conflation between the right of those with nuclear weapons, with F-37s, with tanks, with fleets, with this whole battery of death and destruction at their behest, and people that are fighting to liberate themselves, to maintain, I'll use the word, their own dignity and respect, to resist. It's a false comparison. It's a false comparison. And for years it's sold. It no longer sells. I mean, the reality of it is, you've got a big chunk of the world that still remains occupied one way or another, but you also have a big chunk of the world that is no longer willing to be silent and is moving to fight back in various ways, in various means throughout the world. More power to them, and I stand with them.
You know, I gotta say, one of the things that has been really interesting along those lines with kind of the whole more in the world, right? You know, with a lot of the work we did in a lot of countries that were attempting, be it revolution, all the way starting way back even with like the Green Wave in Iran, where the people just wanted, I mean, basically some more human rights, and they wanted a fairer government system in place, and they wanted, honestly, to stop getting shot and black-bagged in the street. But, you know, that's happening right now in Colombia. The same thing that was happening during that is now happening in Colombia. Protesters in the streets are just getting shot. The police have full right to pretty much kill whoever they want right now, and there's a big struggle going on down there. But what's been kind of interesting during this time period is, because groups of hacker types have been more and more necessary in the revolutions of today, because of how computerized and how really just computer controlled even the military is. We've heard a lot more of a lot of other countries that are working towards revolution right now. Like, I mean, there are 10 nations that I know of that have groups that are this close to making their move on the government, and every one of them are dictatorships that have it coming. And it's a good feeling knowing that the people out there are starting to finally rise up and feel like they can get rid of a lot of, I mean, basically colonial installed dictatorships.
Yeah, no, look. This vestige of what was is done. And yes, there are going to be down periods, and yes, there are going to be painful periods, and yes, there are going to be people that are going to pay with their liberty and their lives. Absolutely, it's depressing, it's horrible. And I've said it. I think the first time I used this phrase was in a courtroom in a trial with a jury many years ago in the Bronx. It's a marathon. It ain't a sprint. It's a long struggle. So someone recently said, how do you keep doing it? And, you know, I was adopted, essentially, my godfather, when I was a community organizer and a social worker, when I was a human being, before I became a lawyer, many years ago, by a man named Leslie Roberts. He was one of Martin Luther King's top advisors. He was the head of District 65 UAW, 1199. He was an organizer. He broke the back of J.P. Stevens. He was the international lead for the trade union movement to boycott South Africa. And as a young man, he said to me, you know, look, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You got to be careful when you go to the barricades, because the first time you go to the barricades and you lose, the second time they don't fear you. So pick your battles right. Fight them through every way you have to fight them, every means. And, you know, through him, I met Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis. They were next door neighbors. They were friends and other people in the movement. But, you know, this is an old trade union approach. It's, you know, they talk about the long haul in terms of COVID. The struggle is a long haul. But look, it's 73 years. Let's get back to Palestine, more than 73 years, when the Irgun and the Stern Gang and the Haganah and all the terrorists, the Zionist terrorist groups started to explode to kill Palestinians and the British 20 years, 25 years, 30 years before the Nakba began formally.
Yeah.
This is a struggle, and it goes on, and it has its painful moments. But I believe, and lots of folks believe right now, the end is in sight. I'm not quite sure what that end is going to be. I have my own theory, and I've discussed it with a lot of Palestinian players over the last 25 years. But I have little doubt that Israel is now completely on the down end. That the notion of a nation state is done. The notion that they can continue to unleash hordes of kids from Brooklyn to scream death to Arabs is done. The notion that they can continue to just imprison more and more and more Palestinians or continue to drop bombs, yes, it's still happening, but it's not what it was or where it's going. There's still
No,
a long struggle to go, but I am optimistic.
the conversation is changing.
Yeah, definitely is.
Definitely.
You know, I think back to 93, 94, 95, when I'm making submissions to federal judges on Palestinian cases, and people are looking at me like, what the fuck is this guy's problem?
Right.
You know, what are you talking about? When,
You're
as
on the
you
wrong
said,
side.
there were 3 people in the street, 2 people in the courtroom, whatever it was, and where we are now 27 years later, 25 years later, I have no doubt that there's a seismic change coming.
I mean, it's good to hear. I trust that you've got a slightly more informed opinion than me on some of that. So that's good to hear. You know what I want to say as we keep talking. Chat. We're over an hour here, and that's kind of what I asked Stanley for. I'm sure we can go for a little bit longer, but if you guys have any questions or anything that you want asked, please put them in the chat, and I'll bring them up. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've really loved is, as we kind of like the hacktivist crowd became way more public, one of the things we needed very clearly early on was lawyers who cared about the cause, not just who would show up, but actually understood the fight. Even no matter how technical your ability might happen to be, just understood the fight itself, right? And I've always appreciated that you showed up as early as you did in the struggle, because we needed people like you. We needed people like you, people like Jay. We needed all of these people, because no matter how hard we fight to keep ourselves from even getting caught, other institutions have billions, and I'm barely making rent. So with those odds, they're gonna find some of us.
Well,
And
I got to tell you, Barrett called me through a mutual friend in 2010, 11, or whatever it was, and said, listen, there's this case, it's unfolded. There's this young woman named Mercedes. We need a lawyer. She needs a lawyer. She's great. Can you help us? Now,
yeah,
I didn't know anything I knew about the movement, but in terms of the technical stuff,
right.
so I said, fine, why don't you have Mercedes come to see me? So Mercedes shows up. She's got her hat down over her nose. She's got her shades
Right.
on. She pops in. She sits down in my office. 35 minutes later, I realize I don't understand the word she said, but I love her.
Talented.
She's got fire.
Super talented.
She's got fire in the belly. And so powerful. I'll tell you, one of the little known, we ended up in that case, quote, negotiating from what started out as a 10-year sentence with people getting misdemeanors, conditional discharges, and $5,000 fines. And one of the ways we did this was they appointed a magistrate to sit and talk to individuals. So when it came time to talk to Mercedes, and the magistrate was completely neutral, when it came time to talk to Mercedes, they said, okay, counsel Mercedes, and Mercedes said, let's go. I said, I'm not going in. I said, go in and sit down, tell your story to the magistrate. Let her know who you are, what you are, where you go, and why. And she looked at me. She said, are you fucking kidding me? I said, yeah, but just keep your fucking kidding me to a slim.
Right.
An hour and a half later, Mercedes came out and gave me the finger. And later, the judge actually commented on how powerful her presentation had been. So, yeah, I got involved with the movement. I met some incredible people. They were determined. They were focused. They were committed. They refused to be witnesses to history, understood very clearly the notion of electronic sit-ins, that it had changed, that circumstances had changed and had evolved. And it was a great case. And then when we were done with that case, the lawyers sat down with us from the Payback 13 and said, how did you do this shit? And I said, it's simple. You humanize people. You take them out of the crosshairs of the FBI, out of the crosshairs of the evil empire. You humanize them. You get them to talk. You sit down. You deal. And don't forget, in the middle of this case is when Aaron killed himself.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting around with a fucking prosecutor in a courtroom in California saying during this discussion with 10 other or 14 other lawyers there, we don't need another suicide. We don't need another Aaron Swartz. Brilliant young men and women that are committed to making this a better land and world for us all. And that fucking asshole looked at me and said, I've had a lot of people that have killed themselves. And I said, well, then you're a perfect prosecutor, my friend. But at the end of the day, we got what we needed. And then Payback 13 got the same misdemeanor disposition. It's changed. It's become more complicated as the so-called, quote, hacks have expanded and becoming a bigger, quote, fear or enemy factor for especially totalitarian regimes such as the United States.
Right.
But I learned a lot. And, I'll tell you a funny story about this. And Mercedes likes to tell this story. The judge had to appoint a grand master whose job was to give lessons to the defense team on computers, on computer science, on technology. And literally this was set up. Okay. And we would have conference calls. So the first conference call I participated in, I was 10 minutes into the discussion. There were 12, 13 other lawyers sitting in the room. And I put it on mute, and I got up and walked away. And my assistant said, what are you doing? I said, I don't understand a fucking word. This is a drug case. This is a case of women and men of principle. I'm not going to get sucked into the world of forensics. And that's the way we tried the case. And that's the way a lot of cases that are political in nature have to be tried. Don't get drawn in by the forensics. Get drawn in by the humanity of your client, by the women and men, by the struggle, by the movement, by the issue, by the volume. That's what it's about. Because if you get drawn into the narrow confines of forensics, the FBI lab wins. Fuck forensics. We're talking about principle. We're talking about purpose. We're talking about lives. We're talking about young women and men who are committed to making this a better world for us all. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, next. And that's what it is. This reducing people to criminals because they refuse to embrace this blind, deadly ideology is unacceptable. And for defense attorneys and activists and community movers, that's the issue. Whether it's Clarence Darrow or John Brown or Tom Paine or Emma Goldman or Mercedes, over the course of 200 years, resistance and struggle is about taking to the streets and spreading the message. The message may have changed, the means of spreading it may have changed, but the struggle is no less principled or pure.
Damn straight. You brought up one point that we like to make, and I like to really specifically put, kind of a strong spin on, and that is the idea of the sit-in. The sit-in led to many things. The sit-in was part of the civil rights movement. The sit-in was part of the suffragette movement. The sit-in has been a powerful weapon in the dissident and activist space for a long time. And in this digital age, we have to come up with ways that we can do it. And I believe we have. The DDoS, the distributed denial of service against places, is the exact same thing as standing in their doorway. It is the exact same thing as taking up the entire space inside of a business so no one else can use that business. It is the digital version of a sit-in, and it needs to be treated as such in court.
Absolutely. Look, the reality of it is, I recently had an argument with the federal prosecutor who was, reminding me of technical violations of the law. And I took her to a walk down history lane, reminding her that until 2003, 10 years after he'd been president, Nelson Mandela was still a terrorist.
Yeah.
That history is filled with people that we exalt as great heroes, as freedom fighters, as people of principle and purpose, who in their day were terrorists, were the enemy, were executed, were assassinated, were lynched, were disappeared, and we now look at them with pride. And I'm not talking about we in terms of the United States, I'm talking about the world community. So when you begin to look at political activists, at movements, at individuals that put issues before their own personal well-being, you got to keep in mind that this is a long struggle, a long march, and as I say, the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter is who wins.
You know, it's one of those things. Yeah, I struggle a lot with this because I started off my life as the son of an outright criminal. I mean, my father was a bank robber and a drug dealer and all kinds of other stuff, and I was not given any kind of lessons on right or wrong, so I went down the wrong path. And I did not find my way to activism and, you know, I mean, just the right term, the struggle, until I was in my mid 20s. And when I got there, this is, you know, now I'm 44 at this point. The gray hairs are setting in, and I think
You're a kid.
I think the gray hairs showed up like 4 years ago because of the struggle. Um, you know, it is not easy for all the people out there joking about, you know, George Soros paying all us lefties. Doesn't happen. Most of us deep in the struggle, spending our days doing activism, are poor as hell, struggling to figure out how to pay the bills while still getting shit done that we actually think needs to get done. And you know, the struggle isn't just the fight itself; it's having the time to have that fight while also somehow providing for yourself and your family. There's a lot more to the struggle than just the activism itself, you know. And I do think my gray is mostly due to that part of the struggle.
Listen, you're a kid. I was talking to someone the other day, and I actually posted something on Twitter that I was a pacifist till I was 16 and got my nose bloodied by the cops during the anti-war movement in Vietnam, crossing the Brooklyn Bridge trying to grab it. And that was my one experience coming in where I was a pacifist. I said, that's done. History's done. So it's been a long struggle. You're 44. My first arrest and my first injury with cops was when I was 16,
Yep.
which is a long time ago. And I've been lucky. I've had incredible mentors. I've been in crossroads of history. I was a Vista volunteer 1975. So we're talking 45 years ago, 60 miles south of Wounded Knee around the same time.
Yep.
From there, I went to community organizing back in New York. And the rest is, you know, I finally reached a point where already as a social worker, for 5 or 6 years, my godfather said, enough, you're wasting your energy, go to law school. And I went to law school and went to legal aid in 1983. And I was in Manhattan Supreme Court the other day,
Yep.
and I was watching a young prosecutor argue with a not much older judge. And I thought to myself, when I started with legal aid, he wasn't born, and she was probably in junior high school.
I was born in 76, so you just said 75, but that was a year before I was born.
Well, you know, look, it's as I said, I was mentored by some incredible people. My hero as a young man growing up was Clarence Darrow, who had been dead forever already.
Yep.
You know, Malcolm X was an idol of mine as a young man. You know, women from the Weather Underground movement I was friends with and knew and represented eventually. I was born in a particular time in this country where we didn't know what it was to be passive observers. We fought, we struggled, we went to prison. Some of us lost our lives. Some of us were disappeared, and it evolved. And I'll tell you, I ran across a lawyer that I've known for many years. Actually knew him as a young activist about, I don't know, 8, 9 years ago somewhere. And he said he'd still been following me, couldn't believe I was still fighting the fight. And I said to him, why did you stop?
Yeah.
And he said, because I grew up. And I said, you mean you surrendered?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's giving up. That's comfortability setting in and you accepting it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as he said, look, I've given up the law now. I own 12 restaurants down in the South, and life is good. And, you know, he had a terrible suntan, and he said, you still fight the fight. I said, look, to my very last breath, I'm going to fight the fight.
Yeah,
it's all I know. It's all I've known for going on half a century. And it is what it is. I mean, the notion that I'm going to suddenly recreate my politics, my beliefs, my principles, my friends, my family, my loves, it's crazy. It ain't happening. It is what it is.
I met my wife at a protest. I don't think I can stop now. We're one and the same here. This is
Yeah,
gonna. I'm gonna die a poor activist, and I'm gonna be happy all the way there, no matter how bad it gets, because I did what I thought was right. You know. Um.
you look back at the end and you smile and you know you fought the good fight. And the notion that Nelson Rockefeller died at age 72 with $11 billion in the bank, you laugh at.
Damn
Because
straight.
my father died at 95 with 6 cents to his name. All right.
Yep.
The reality of it is a very short journey.
Yeah.
And you're either going to do things to try to change it, to move it, to be part of the process, or you're going to surrender. And for young
Yeah.
women and men, young activists, and not so young women and men and activists who have been there, that's what it's about. I don't want to hear about, the lofty ideals of approaching, accumulating certain property and certain wealth and certain position and certain prominence. It's okay. There are lots of people that spend their lives on the streets, and when they look back, they've given meaning to their existence. They've given meaning to their family. They've been inspiring to other people. And if you've done that, it's been a good life.
Damn straight. I love it. I love it. Wow. I mean, is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to bring up? We've covered a lot.
Yeah, I mean, wearing gloves while you mulch your area, your flower bed, does that create some sort of chemical problem for your hands?
I have no idea how to garden.
I'll tell, I'll tell you a funny story.
Yeah.
I've come of new age. I now have an Android,
Yeah.
a phone,
Oh boy.
and I fuck it up 87 times a day. I pull stuff up I don't mean to pull up. I get involved in stuff I don't mean to do. I've got 600 contacts coming through. So someone just called. I have no idea. I hit the wrong button. It took a photo of me. So if there's anyone out there that has 2 vaccines and is within throwing distance of the mountains and wants to come up sometime and teach me how to use this fucking phone, give me a shout.
Yeah, and that's the mountains in New York, not the mountains like in Colorado or something.
No, this is I'm in the northwest tip of the very northwest tip of the Catskill Mountains. I'm about 20 miles away from the Delaware River Gap.
As I understand things, that used to be a much more fun spot in the 70s. Just
Yeah,
gonna throw that out there.
I'm 20 miles from where Woodstock was, which I went to, by the way, and I passed Bethel yesterday.
Nice, nice.
It's a good area. It's a small area. My town has 350 people in it. My neighbor is almost a half a mile away. I have more cows and coyotes and coy dogs around me than people.
That actually sounds great.
But I'm looking forward to getting back to the city. I'm actually looking for a place in the city.
No, well, I mean, I'm glad that we're vaccinated. I'm glad that we are both on the other end of it. But I am, still wondering about, so the Delta variant is hitting now, and they've said now that people with the Pfizer and the Johnson & Johnson are both, they're low percentages. You've still got like a 49% chance of not getting the thing, but you've got a high enough percent chance that the Delta variant can still hit you. So like, I am still wearing my mask even though I am vaccinated when I'm out.
So am I. I spoke to a client of mine today who 2 vaccines, his wife has 2 vaccines.
Yep.
She's come down with COVID. She's got a temperature.
Yep.
She's sweating. She's got some respiratory problems. Now the infant, the 2-year-old was also diagnosed with it today. They're doing much better. So, I have another client who says he's waiting to see what happens. And I say, waiting to see what happens.
Yeah.
It's there. And the ground is filled with 600,000 people whose genetic system is intact and they're dead.
Yeah.
So even if I'm going to turn into JFK Jr. or the lizard people, it's cool. I'll live to fight another day.
Exactly. They don't need to be putting microchips in you. If you look at all the January 6th people, just because they had their phone in their pocket, they're all getting arrested now.
Yeah.
So
by the way, one of the Oath Keepers not only took a plea today, but it came out they're earning a 5K. They're cooperating, and it's a senior Oath Keeper. So
that's going to be a lot more people arrested.
Oh yeah. I'm just hoping that the pardon circle gets burned on this yet.
Right.
So we'll see.
Someone in the chat is asking, a fellow Woodstocker, what were you doing during Hendrix?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean,
Is the answer LSD?
well,
It
Woodstock for
was
me,
Woodstock. No
no
judgment.
matter how many times I try to focus on Woodstock, it always ends up just a blot to me. Maybe
Right.
it was Snoopy, maybe it was something else. I've got a friend on Twitter that posted a picture of 400 naked people, and she said, "There's your butt." Um, I don't remember much. I remember Hendrix. The music was phenomenal. The solidarity was great.
Yep.
The fact that the traffic was backed up to the Tappan Zee Bridge is legendary.
Well, yeah.
Uh,
So one of the only pictures I have of my father is actually him asleep on the hood of his car in that traffic trying to get to Woodstock. Literally taking a nap on the hood of the car in the traffic.
I went with a friend of mine who was probably 7, 8 years older, who had recently come back from Vietnam, and wanted to go. And he said, "I'm going. I'm going to get fucked up. I need to get away from this shit."
Yep.
And we went, and it is what it is.
Hey,
Um,
fun stuff. The fences
let-
came down. Everyone got in.
and every time I drive by Bethel,
Yep.
I flash at it. I can remember. I can close my eyes.
That's awesome.
Do I remember with clarity? No. But I
No.
certainly remember enough of the moment, of the activity, of the energy,
Right.
that
It's
it
the
was a
feeling.
defining moment for a generation. And not just because we were stoned and naked and fucking and all that stuff,
Right.
but because it clearly was a moment of solidarity, which then branched off and went in different directions.
Hey, it's a moment that gave us Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And that
Yeah.
was some good music.
Yeah, if only Neil Young had not end up being an anti-BDSer, life would be good.
Right? I was reading a big article the other day about his release of all the music that all the other Crosby, Stills, Nash had that they had thought was deleted, and I'm reading the whole thing, and they're giving all this big fluff to him, and I'm like, God, I love Ohio, and I love so many. They have so many good songs, and they were written by him, and then he turned out. Why? It's the whole never meet your heroes thing, like I just
Well, he's someone who has been very supportive of indigenous movements, especially in Canada.
yeah.
He's raised money, he's performed, he's done things, but inexplicably, he's not able to make the connection between indigenous movements in North America, indigenous movements in Latin America, indigenous movements in the Middle East. And there's this bridge that
Yeah.
the same folks he screams about in Canada are first cousin to the same folks that he's willing to embrace in occupied Palestine.
Yeah.
What can I say?
It's the world we live in.
Yes.
It is. All right. What else do you guys want to talk about, chat? You got anything else for us? I'm starting to get hungry for dinner. I'm getting ready to leave here. But I want to, one thing. This is a lot of fun. We should do this more often. I enjoy this a lot. For you, this stuff. After this, tomorrow night it'll go up on YouTube, so we can link it to everyone, and everyone can watch that wasn't here live. But yeah, I mean, this is, everyone else is saying that they just had pizza and all that. And for chat for a second, John, you say a lot about the thing that went on with Amazon with you and everything else, and I'm confused as hell at this point. I don't know what happened. There's too much to read, and my life is so damn busy that I haven't actually taken a minute to look at it. Maybe sometime over the next week I will find a few minutes and I'll reach out to you. I think you're on the Discord. And you can explain it to me in easier terms. We have someone in the chat here who Amazon seems to have wronged pretty badly. We're talking on the order of millions of dollars worth of wrong. But I don't understand it enough to talk to you about it and see what your opinion is. So that we can save for another episode. But yeah. I will definitely figure it out, because it sounds like Amazon did something really bad there, which, you know what? I just believe because it's Amazon.
That's what Amazon does.
Yeah, that's their thing. Their whole MO.
Yeah.
Yeah. Holy crap. For the audience, I would say look for a lot of fun news coming out of Colombia tomorrow. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on there over the next couple days. And, pro the protesters, less pro the government, But yeah, and also, again, continue to support all of these causes. For anyone who is a friend of Kevin Gallagher, who I think you talked to at least a couple times through the fight with all of the, he was there with Barrett Brown. He ran the Free Barrett Brown group. He passed away. the official obituary is out. It's on the Discord. I don't really want to post it massively publicly, but if anyone wants to go see it on the Discord, they can. There's a date. It's next week. The family is accepting flowers. If anyone wants to send them, there's a little button on the obituary where you can send them all that. So if anyone is interested, again, Kevin was a big loss to our community, and that's another thing me and you deal with a lot. It's not only the people that we help support in other countries or the other things we do that are across all these imaginary borders, but our community is full of a lot of people who have had to deal with the struggle and who have succumbed to the struggle, really. I mean,
Yeah.
to put it, the simplest way I can. And we deal with this a lot.
It drains you. There's a heavy cost. It's not light. And I speak to lots of young activists and a lot of young lawyers, and buckle up. That's all I can say.
Well, yeah.
You never count your success by the people that love you, but by the people who hate you.
Yeah, well, for that, I always say, and, maybe you should go to YouTube on this one because I think you'll like it. If you really want to understand your personal worth to the world, it's all about your haters. And there's a YouTube clip of Cat Williams talking about haters. So if you just go to YouTube and type in Cat Williams haters, he describes it better than I can. But haters are gonna hate. Don't hate them back for hating. It's what they do. It's their life. It's their thing. You're never gonna change them. But if you got a lot of them hating on you, it's probably because you're doing a lot of good shit out there. So no, but on the people passing, the one thing that I've had to deal with a lot with the draining nature of all of this is I don't know, it's like with the activist types, a lot of the younger activists, especially if they pass away, the families don't know what they were up to. The parents don't know that their 30-year-old kid was doing these amazing things out in the world because a lot of it's private. And you probably learned this through some of the PayPal stuff. There were some public things that happened, but there were a hell of a lot more private things that happened during those battles.
Yeah.
And, I've spent the last 6 months, 3 times, having conversations with families that I can't have publicly, teaching them about their own children because they didn't know the things their kids were doing. And, I mean, that's when you start doing the stuff that we do, that's one of the prices you have to pay. That's one of the burdens you have to bear. And, it is heavy, and it is always heavy, and I'm still feeling it pretty strong. I'm still there, over these last few weeks, really feeling it.
It's there. I've had seriously a half dozen fairly close people, friends that have been assassinated. I mean, outwardly assassinated.
Yeah.
I've had, I don't know how many dozens, hundreds maybe, that have been imprisoned. It's a heavy price to pay. I've had a lot of families I've had to hug and hold. I've had a lot of families. A story, I have a friend of mine who was assassinated by Israel. I had been with him in his car 4 days before an Israeli missile blew up the car, Abu Shanab, and assassinated him. And when he died, I was in Portland on a case, alleged terrorism case, and my phone rang in what was the middle of the night for me, and it was his wife telling me and paying her condolences to me because she knew how close the two of us were. And there was nothing I could say. And the last time that I was in Israel, quote unquote, proper, in trying to get through Erez into Gaza, they didn't allow me to go in. It was going to be a family gathering with his wife, his children, and other people. But it's horrible. It comes with the turf. But the price of liberty it ain't cheap. It carries a heavy burden. Sometimes it's your liberty, sometimes it's your life, sometimes it's your stability, your standing, your family. And these are choices we have to make and decisions we have to take, and we go on.
Yep. It's but I don't know. It's weird to talk about it, but it's one of those. I don't know. It's the price that people need to know is being paid, and people need to understand that that we go through it for the reason I think that we need to have better accountability among ourselves for our mental health, right? And people need to understand in this community that they can reach out to others and get that help they need. Because I mean, you among all of the friends that I have seen nearing the same numbers that I have of our friends, our acquaintances, just die from the acts that they are doing, whether good or bad. They and it's the death itself is always horrible. And I don't know. I just want to keep repeating on a few more episodes here that, look, anyone out there, it is not a bad thing to ask for help when your mental health is getting affected by the work you're doing in this space. We all feel it. No matter how much you've seen me do, no matter how much you've seen Stanley do, I think you will 100% agree. We all feel it. Speak to people, talk to us, tell us what's going on.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it's important. It's really important. In the chat, one of the things I hinted at earlier might have just dropped. Ransomware in Colombia Attorney General's office. Some hackers might have just hit the Attorney General of Colombia pretty hard.
I'm shocked.
Woo! Yes. Yeah. So, and well deserved. Everyone should go watch that video. It's freaking great. Yeah. So, good times. Let's see if that is actually on Twitter already. Yeah, there it is. I am gonna retweet this one right out because I just, I think everyone should see that one. When there's an oppressive regime coming down on people, I really like it when it's the AG that gets hit the hardest first. I don't know why, but for me, that's just like, that's a fair target.
Listen, open eyes. It's what you do. It's who you are. And do me a favor. Talking about hacking, let me get back to it. When Tilly comes, be careful.
Yeah. No. I have learned it has been well over a decade of kind of being the guy who got outed so early that I'm so public now. I think I've done a decent job of figuring out where the lines are. Because I got kind of sick of people getting arrested, honestly. That was starting to kind of hurt our vibe, I mean, for people,
I every day at least once I go to Tilly's Twitter line feed and I go, oh fuck, oh fuck, it happens.
We all love Tilly too, like so much.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
I mean, you're gonna watch. It's amazing.
Thank God she's in Switzerland and not in Canada. If she were in Canada, she'd be in the United States and she'd be in jail.
She would have been extradited in hours, not weeks, months.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's horrible. So everyone in chat, I think I'm going to call the show. I think I'm going to go eat some dinner. Gonna let Stanley go here, and I'm going to say, I mean, we don't need to do this again next week, but we should definitely do this way more often. This was fun. I enjoyed the hell out of this.
Yeah, so did I. Listen, I loved your show. The questions you ask, the issues you push. My God, someone might even consider you a journalist. Heaven forbid.
Oh no, maybe not in California, but everywhere else.
Right. I mean, the exploration, the nuance, and in your face, and being on top of this stuff, and raising lots of questions as much as providing answers is important.
It is.
So all I could say is it's been a pleasure on your show. I look forward to doing it again. And normally I would say up the rebels. However, lately I've been dealing with a colleague of mine in Belfast who's going through some pain, so I'm going to say up the Ra.
Damn straight, everybody. All right. I want to say good night, everybody. Good night, Stanley. And I am going to kill our mics. Good night, everyone.